Let's now talk about the state of the nation, economically, politically, and what we expect to see in the next 5 years. We are joined by politician and businessman JIMI WANJIGI. Good morning, Jimmy.
Good morning, Eric.
Karibu sana to Kenya's biggest conversation.
It's good to be back here.
You haven't been here this year?
No, I haven't been this year. I was last year in July, I think. I was just checking. It's about 6 months now.
Yes.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
You invited me, but we wanted to keep quiet for a while. And I think this is appropriate. The time has now come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last time you were here, you were talking about this expose.
Yes.
And the new book that you had released, and it was looking at the tax and tax issues, right?
Yes.
We want to talk about that. I mean, we are not tax, but debt. We are at that point now where the conversation is about debt. How much actually are we paying? How much are we still needing to borrow so we can run operations of government, and the effect of that in the entire country? But let's first hear the day's proverb from CT.
Our proverbs for the whole of this week, beginning Monday, ending tomorrow, are from the country of Côte d'Ivoire. Mutual gifts cement friendships.
Mutual gifts cement friendships.
Now, complain. Say it is too short.
No.
It's not an essay.
The complaint was not that the proverb is too short.
What are the
It
complaints?
is how you got into the
You just
into the
said
house.
it like that.
And I should have said it like
You know,
those.
Jimmy, how he gives us the proverbs every morning. So, we say the day's proverb with City, and he said, right.
He starts with saying,
The entire of this week, our proverbs are from the country of Ivory Coast, or now called Côte d'Ivoire. And then he says, today's proverb, and this is the second last
even tells
proverb
us
of the
the
week.
president of the country.
Yeah. Now,
Even
today
the
we asked him,
population.
what's the proverb? Proverb is
Mutual gifts did what friendship?
I think he wants to go straight to business, it seems.
No.
You know,
You've made people get used to something and they expect it to be done in a particular manner.
I agree.
You don't just wake up like goats and leave. It's only goats that wakes up and
Please
leaves in
accept
the
my
morning.
apologies. I apologize.
So Ndu, I think he's in a mood.
It would appear so, but you know, you have to beat him like butter back into.
Jimmy, what's your interpretation of that proverb?
I agree with it. I fully agree with it.
Yeah.
There's nothing that binds people together than gifts. Yes.
It's all about the gifts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mutual gifts cement friendships.
Yes.
Okay. So, Jimmy, the state of the nation. Yesterday we had an economist here, and he was even telling us, all right, right now some of the debts that had been borrowed many years ago are coming to maturity. There's still more that will be coming to maturity. The Eurobond of 2014 will be maturing next year, and this and the other, and we'll be needing to maybe pay some 700 billion shillings or so on just
Interest.
and interest. Here, this year, we know the government was late in paying salaries last month for civil servants.
Yes.
And what we're told by the political leadership was it's because they had to balance, right, the money that's come in and the debts that are due, and then look for more money, and then you pay salaries and you run operations. If you look at that situation, is it a true representation of what exactly is happening, or is there more to it than we are being told?
Well, first and foremost, Eric, let me say that I'm very glad that you're addressing state of the nation vis-a-vis the economy, because I think that is the biggest challenge every Kenyan has today. In preparation for my presidential race last year, and I was here, I think, July, did what you call the first forensic audit on this debt. And I think we came out with some very interesting facts. At the time, because we were coming close to elections, I think it didn't get the attention that it deserves. But we are now at a state that I think people are understanding what this debt is doing to our lives. It is strangling us. It's very simple. People do not understand government. Government source of revenue is taxation. The other source is debt. These are the two sources of government revenue. And there's something else we don't seem to understand. What government does, it does on our behalf. We are the sovereign. So we are responsible for what that government does. It takes debt, it is us who are responsible. Now, we have reached a stage, as we are talking today, the last published figures of our revenue, which were in March this year, showed that the tax revenue collected is 1.4 trillion shillings. On an estimate for end of June of 2.1. But 1.4 has been collected. That is an average of 155 billion per month. Okay? Now, look at our debt book. Our debt payments this year are exactly 1.4 trillion to be paid this year.
Yep.
So as we are talking today, all the revenue has been collected is going towards debt.
The debt repayment.
Now, CT, I want you to take a pen and I want you to understand this very clearly. And I want Kenyans to simplify this. Take a pen. Kenya revenue is where tax revenue is gotten from. So, for every 100 shillings, right, take 100 shillings, government is now, according to the estimates, let's assume between now and June, I don't think they'll get to 2.1. Our calculation is that it's going to be about 80% of our tax revenue is going to go to debt. So for every 100 shillings, 80 shillings goes to debt. Right? So we're left with 20. 50 shillings goes to salaries.
But there's only 20 shillings left.
Yes. So calculate it. So we are minus what?
30.
Minus 30.
Right. You have 30 shillings that goes to counties.
Okay.
Okay? And you have about 35 shillings that goes to what you call OPEX. Making sure police have petrol in their cars and so on and so forth.
And ministers.
Yes.
And
all of these things. What are we at?
Minus 95.
Very good. So tell me what room we have to borrow. We have borrowed over 100% of our revenue. We have no more room. So when you are saying we are going to borrow, refinance, that's the panic you're now seeing in the market. That's the panic. So where is government going to get this revenue? Are they going to raise taxes in the proposed budget coming? We are already at what you call diminishing returns on tax collections. How much more are you going to squeeze us? They will not raise that revenue. Now, what is illustrative is something that is not being talked about enough. The danger of debt default. Okay? When you start seeing a government struggling with paying salaries, Eric, as you mentioned, you've seen some of the government's people on television talking about the balance between debt and salaries. What are the priorities? We are tethering on what is called debt default. And I think Kenyans need to understand what that means to our lives. Ghana recently, December, went through a modicum of debt default. They could not meet their debt obligations. So what did Ghana do? They went to the IMF. And the IMF told them, before we look at you dealing with your debts, the sovereign in your country must understand and feel the pain first. Yes, city. So Ghana calls in their bonds and says, now, if you have a bond of 10,000 shillings, you now take it at a discounted rate of 30%. So it shaves off.
People who had lent it domestically.
Yes.
Basically.
It shaves off 3,000 shillings and says 7,000 is yours. Now this 3,000, come back for it in 3 years. The next 3 years is 0% interest. But in 3 years, you come, we give you 3%. But it didn't stop there. They went to bank accounts. Because the threat of banks collapsing is huge. So they come to your bank account. They raid your current account. they do the same thing. Here they will raid your M-Pesa and do the same thing.
What is raiding and doing the same thing? What does that mean?
It means that if you have a deposit in your M-Pesa of 10,000 shillings, they will take 30%. And you then have 7,000.
So your
if
balance,
you have a current account,
your balance suddenly becomes 7,000.
becomes 7,000. Who is the sovereign?
It's you, the citizen.
How do you starve off a bank collapse?
You detain the cash.
You detain the cash. And that is coming to this country. That is our best case scenario.
That is our best
best case scenario.
Right, I'm waiting for
But
the
what
worst
has
case
it happened?
scenario.
What has happened to Ghana in 4 months? You've had an inflation rate that went from 12% to 45%.
Yeah.
So even whatever money you have left has become half its value on the market.
Right.
All right?
Purchasing power.
The 7,000 that was
halved.
left on M-Pesa is now worth 3,000.
3,000.
Yes.
This is where we are headed. And that is our best case scenario. If you see Greece, if you remember the issue of Greece, they closed the banks.
Literally.
Literally, for
With
4
people's
years.
deposit.
Your money was locked up.
Yeah.
Lebanon, they are still closed. And the currency has lost 90% of its value. Lebanon is still closed from 2019. Banks are closed. You're told, we'll give you a little stipend every month for you to try and exist, of money that is yours in your bank account. So our best case scenario is the Ghanaian situation. This is a reality to our lives going forward. And what are the implications of this? The implications mean that you cannot have the life that we are living today. However much we are struggling, this struggle will pale in comparison to what is coming. What does it mean in terms of jobs, confidence, salaries, and so on and so forth? This is where we are headed. And this is what we were trying to articulate last year when we did this audit. This audit was an analysis of our debt and the fact that it is going to choke us. Next year's repayments in the next financial year are also 1.4 trillion. Where is this revenue coming from? The following year, our repayments are 1.6 trillion. They keep increasing. I've seen some people say we have 2 years to recover the economy. We will not recover. As long as that burden is on us, there's nothing called recovery here. Because what are we going to do to commensurately produce the income to deal with that debt?
And is that not the solution that we're saying needs to happen? Because right now, I mean, just look at the way things are. Kenya, as an economy, is not producing, because we're saying that the steps towards development means that you for yourself as an entity, as a sovereign entity, are manufacturing, you're producing, you're creating a surplus. That surplus then is essentially what you run your country on. So even if you do then make, profits, even if you are in debt, you're able to service and finance those loans or debts or whatever while still keeping your country running. What I'm hearing you say, Jimmy, is that you're not able to run the country. Okay, and here are examples. You're not able to send cash to the counties, okay? Another example, so that we can understand where we are going here. We had children go to school in February. Capitation was not sent to schools until well towards the end of the first term, which, just ended. Health workers, just now, we are hearing that they've not been paid in some counties, and even that counties had to scramble around to get finances from here and there to be able to make that happen. So we're saying, number one, Kenya is not producing enough. There's not enough running around for the OPEX that you speak about to happen, number one. Number two, most of the revenue or anything that you actually are collecting, mopping up from the market, goes towards servicing this debt.
Correct.
The way other countries do it, who are healthy, quote unquote, is that because they are manufacturing or because they are producing, they're able to handle these matters at the same time. One would say that perhaps it's not all doom and gloom if there was something that you were able to do, right? Are you saying that Kenya, right now, there is nothing that Kenya can do but to sit and wait for the storm?
Let me assure you of something. It's very much like in our own homes. You reach a level where you enter what is called a debt trap. You're living to pay your debt. We passed that long time ago. The minute we reached over 30% of our income going to debt, we passed that threshold. We are in a debt trap. And unless we get out of that debt trap, get relief of that debt trap, there's nothing in the medium term that is going to save us from this debt default and the crisis that is coming.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Are you saying?
So
We are
unless
sitting
we
on the
get a
tracks and the
relief,
train is coming.
Yes, I'm very clear about that.
and you're tired.
And I think we better understand this reality, and we must start talking honestly.
So even
So
if we
that we
say
prepare our
let's reduce our salary, let's reduce let's reduce our budget, let's increase our revenue base, nothing.
Well, you tell me where we are going to get a relief of 1.4 trillion in our budget. If you can draw it up, great. Our salaries are 500 billion.
Yes.
All right? So you say you have it? So people take half salaries? Great. So you save 250.
Yes.
Give us the rest.
The operations and maintenance,
Yes?
OPEX, yeah.
300 billion.
So no
Have-
more capitation?
have it.
No more capitation? No more subsidies to anything?
Everybody pays school fees.
Everybody pays school fees from where? You know, you're assuming there is money being generated
No,
by,
no.
by people.
Stop buying mandazi, stop buying newspapers.
Don't put flowers in
stop-
offices.
no.
Stop it.
So that is 350.
Have
350 by
all
half.
your meetings in your office or in a government
I hope
institution.
CT, you've got a pen. We have 1.4 trillion
Yes.
to look for.
We've removed
Right?
250
Yes.
billion.
So 250 has been removed.
Yeah.
People
OPEX is
volunteer-
about 350.
Government
Right?
workers
So-
voluntarily.
So you've removed the entire 350.
No.
So no more capitation, no more all of these things.
No, we're saying don't
No.
eat mandati in the office. People should eat in their
We,
houses.
we only do the basics.
Basics.
Switch on the lights at night.
When you're going home,
Keep lights off during the day in government offices.
How much do you think you save with that?
okay, let's say another
Half of that.
Half of that?
Ah, no.
So say, I mean, that's very difficult.
175
So
billion.
even say 100.
Okay,
Say 100. So you
100
save,
billion.
you've saved 350.
Okay.
Right. Please find me the rest.
So we are still looking for
You see, this 300,
650.
this 385 that's going to the counties, that 80%, I mean 65% of it is salaries, okay, is recurrent expenditure. So let's also, workers in the counties, accept to take a pay cut for the next, so reduce that again. Reduce some 100 billion shillings.
So 100
But
billion.
you know, Erica, there's something that the previous government under Uhuru Kenyatta and this government seem to be agreed upon. There's this mythical number. It's 2. Then you add some like 9 zeros to it, gives you some like 2 billion. Which
the daily
No,
Corruption.
I think I like that city.
yes, which they keep telling us.
So let the corrupt also give us a break.
They give us
Remove
some
2
of their
billion.
money.
Wait. If you do that maths, by the way, there's come 720 billion here, which you'll save in a year.
But it has never been proven. Because, it's one thing to talk when you're in government or when you are in the opposition. But when you're in government and you make a statement like that, it must be followed up by action.
But
These are
Jimmy,
actually what-
has anybody ever
The auditor
has anybody ever shown you the
But
2 billion
Jimmy-
where it's
but
where it's
Jimmy-
being ripped off
Jimmy-
from?
The Auditor General
Jimmy.
has raised it.
Yeah,
Not
it has
2
been
billion.
raised. No, but hold on. If
Actually,
you
a third.
look, some of these cases that come to
budget.
2
us,
billion per
Yes.
day.
somebody who is earning 21,000 shillings
Yes.
then suddenly has assets worth 35 million. Take that, use the art of extrapolation, and now put it in different parts
propaganda
of the country.
is a very good thing for governments.
EACC
So let's
has
be
brought
very
those
careful.
charges against people.
No. Propaganda is a very good thing for
The
government.
Auditor General said something like 800 billion shillings always goes unaccounted for.
Unaccounted for.
in a year.
Yes.
Right? So 800 billion shillings, this is about a third of, at that point, of our budget, which was...
We are chasing a
two-
ghost.
two-
Let me assure you, we're chasing a ghost. That's a ghost.
You're saying...
Jimmy,
Yeah,
sorry,
I mean,
I've got to
we've had this discussion for donkeys years. We are chasing ghosts here.
No, but Jimmy, look,
We will never, ever, ever, ever. That money you're talking about,
because the Auditor General
you
doesn't
saying
have
there's no
prosecutorial powers,
I'm saying there is corruption.
yes.
But to pin it, it will take you forever. To
Jimmy.
get massive corruption.
Jimmy.
I have something very basic, Cindy,
Yes.
even before you go on. And this is why I did this audit. It is very simple. You see, our budget is anchored in law.
Yep.
in law. All right? In two books, appropriations development, appropriations recurrent.
Yeah.
It is in law. The constitution is clear. The budget must be formulated and put into bills. That's what parliament does.
Yep.
And those are the two bills. The other aspect of the law is that it says we can only borrow for development.
Yep.
All right? So if you look at the last 10 years of the previous regime, Parliament has passed 2 trillion in loans.
For development, we presume.
Yes, it's only for development.
So they say.
No, you see, that's the law that has been passed. And the law means that that is what is anchored in the appropriations development
Yep.
for borrowing.
Yep.
2 trillion. Right? This previous government inherited from Kibaki government 2.3 trillion in outstanding debt. Okay? CT, I like the fact that you've got your pen. So that brings, right, the total debt that we know of that is legal, according to our constitution, as 4.3 trillion. Now, for argument's sake, just remove Kibaki's debt there of 2.3 and say 2.2.
You said 2.3 trillion?
2.3 trillion was the outstanding from Kibaki period.
2.3, not 4.3.
2.3.
Okay.
And then this previous government of Uhuru, right?
Over 9 years.
Over 9 years, Parliament has passed 2 trillion in borrowing.
Okay.
We are the sovereign, correct? Parliament is on our behalf, correct?
Yes.
Right. Now, you go to what is called the exchequer account. That is the only account of government. All right? And in the exchequer account, the central bank tells us what our loans are.
8.9.
Our loans, it said that during the last 9 years, the previous regime took 6 trillion in loans. 6
Trillion.
trillion. So 4 trillion never passed through Parliament. Are we clear? So maybe CT is where you're finding your 2 billion you're talking about per day. But I can assure you, this never passed through Parliament. I had some pundits argue that the budget policy statement talks about this. Budget policy statement is not law. The law are bills passed by Parliament. That is what becomes law.
So essentially what you're saying is that when we talk about the debt, anything that is over and above what the law stipulates and what was passed by Parliament, we don't owe.
We don't know. It is called odious debt.
But you're only counting what has gone into debt as debt to finance the budget deficit.
No, debt to finance development.
In what bill?
Appropriations development bill.
And that is financing the
And
deficit.
that is the only place in our constitution and in PFM law we can borrow. We cannot borrow for recurrent expenditure. It is in our laws. We cannot borrow for recurrent. We can only borrow for development.
Okay. Back a couple of steps. You're saying that in the last 9 years of the Uhuru Kenyatta administration, Parliament approved for government to borrow only 2 trillion shillings
Correct.
in 9 years.
Correct.
And you're basing this on the appropriations bill.
Correct.
So what is the appropriation bill?
The appropriations bill are anchored in section 220 of the Constitution. This is where they say the budget making process. I will define the budget making process. The budget making process is where all expenditure and all revenue is inputted and made law. And it is in 2 bills that are taken to Parliament during the budget process. One is called the Appropriations Bill for Development, and the other is called the Appropriations Bill for Recurrent, where we are going to spend money on development and borrow, and where we are going to spend money on recurrent expenditure. Those are the 2 bills that form what you call the budget of this country. Those bills become law once they are passed and become acts of parliament, that is the only legal way of a government to borrow or to spend money. Now, it's very simple. The PFM law, Public Finance Management Law, has the following quote. Under Section 15.2, the PFM Act of 2012 provides that over the medium term, the national government borrowings shall be used only for financing development expenditure and not for recurrent expenditure.
Okay.
So the government can never borrow to pay salaries,
Yeah.
to put petrol for police cars.
Yeah.
Are we on the same page, Eric?
We are on the same page.
So when it borrows for development under the appropriations development, the lines are very clear. It says the government will contribute so much in taxation for a water project in Kitui. And the funding of the balance that it cannot, which you call the deficit, will be raised, let's say, from Bank of India, Exim Bank India, of so much amount of money. It is put there, right? And that becomes an appropriation. And an exchequer issue is given to the Ministry of Water on the basis of that, right? So that is how the government finances its development,
Okay.
right? Now,
So the
anything aside of that, that is not in appropriations development, is not money that is used for development, because what was passed?
I'm
No.
almost hearing you say, Jimmy, and maybe you can just say it clearly, is that an illegality has happened over and over again. That money has been borrowed
Absolutely.
outside of the boundaries that have been set.
Absolutely.
So this money that was then borrowed, because it was not being borrowed for the purposes of development, because if it was, it would be in the bill.
Yes.
And because it was not being borrowed for that,
Yes.
then an illegality has occurred many times over.
Absolutely. And when an illegality has occurred many times over, you cannot come to the sovereign and tell us we are responsible for it. You cannot. Those who did that illegality are responsible for it, not us.
Okay.
Now,
So
yes.
you're basing this on two. So there's the appropriations laws for every budget cycle.
Yes.
And then you're looking at the treasury returns on debt. And
Not
you're
the
saying,
treasury. The account of the government is in the central bank.
yes, on debt.
And the central bank, it's like your own bank account, is in ABSA or whichever other bank you go to. It is there, equity and so on. Correct?
it shows you.
So the
This is the
bank of
amount.
government, our account, because we are the sovereign, is in central bank. And the central bank statements are showing that over the last 9 years, 4 trillion, in fact, 4.3 trillion was borrowed above what was passed by Parliament. Are we on the same page?
So I want to ask the question there. In this debt account, is it showing just the principal borrowed, or is it principal plus interest?
Plus interest. Everything is
But
there.
in Parliament, what has been
Just
passed,
like your own account, if you take a loan,
what Parliament passes is not plus interest.
no,
It
no,
is the
no,
principal.
it is. Oh, now I'll come to that.
Because I want to, for example, look at one budget. Let's say last year's budget, 3.2 trillion shillings is
Borrowed.
what we are saying we're going to spend in the next financial year.
Yeah.
And in that, we are going to finance it this way. 2.4 trillion shillings will come from revenue collection in taxes, and then the balance 800 billion shillings we are going to borrow. Parliament approves that. So that goes as 800 billion shillings being borrowed, and that's what you are accumulating to 2 trillion over the last 8 years.
Yes.
You see, that 800 billion is the amount being borrowed, not the interest.
Now, the interest is covered in repayments.
Yes.
And repayments are covered in what you call the recurrent appropriations. Deal.
Okay.
All right? So Parliament also approves the repayments of our debt. And interest is covered there. And I don't want to go there right yet, but I'm coming there.
Okay.
Because that is also another story in itself.
Can I ask a question before we get there? Mm-hmm. Okay. If all these things are passed here and passed there and structured here and it's a straight line, and we know what we borrowed, we know the amounts, we know the interest, well ahead of time, what is the required government process of ensuring that these debts are paid? Do we wait until due date to start scrambling to look for money to pay? Or is there a way in which, as government receives money, you appropriate money for that debt, so that come the day the money is actually there, so the government can pay?
Now, you see, you're moving me faster than I wanted. Because now you're moving me to the appropriations recurrent.
Sorry.
Where all debt payments
Where
are
should I
done.
move you to first?
Now, I want us to finish with this aspect. Are we clear that we can only borrow for development? City. Are we clear that that is our law?
That particular part
And
of the
I think we
syllabus
got to
we've
also be
understood.
very clear that we have borrowed in excess of 4 trillion above what we have passed in law.
That one I got.
Now, let me develop this.
Okay.
I want you to take your pen again. City.
Which one? I have 3. Should I take the red one?
Take the red one. Higher.
Things are thick.
Things are completely monumentally thick.
The government of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta inherited a debt of 2 trillion from the previous government.
Yes.
So put that 2 trillion was Kibaki's debt.
Okay.
Parliament passed 2 trillion for borrowing under the Uhuru government. Right?
Yes.
In fact, I think it's 2.3. So call it 4.3. Correct? Higher. The accounts of government show that they borrowed 6.3. Right? So in excess of 4. So for argument's sake, let us even remove the aspect of illegality. Right? So take the 6.3 trillion, add Kibaki's debt of 2, you get to 8.3
trillion.
In fact, that as of March last year, when we did this audit, was what was showing in our central bank account as outstanding. 8.3. 8.3. A little over that, but 8.3. Higher. So let's now go to where you want me to go. Our repayments of debt, including the interest Eric is talking about, CT, are in what is called the Appropriations Recurrent Act.
Yes.
Over the last 9 years, a total of 5.6 trillion shillings has been authorized and has been paid to our debts.
Over the last
9 years. 5.6.
Okay.
And this is in the public domain.
It is in public record. We have taken this audit from nothing else other than public records.
I see.
So CT and maybe Eric, because you're the ones who raised this question, tell me, why is that 5.6 not reflected in the central bank account?
Of money having gone out.
Because it was paid.
Yeah, but
So how are we still owing 8.3, 8.4?
I'd like to ask, this one now, forgive, my brain moves a little slowly.
Okay.
When we're dealing with money. Yes. If it's my own, it moves fast, but when someone else's, it moves.
That's a good one.
This 5.6 trillion that we paid,
Yes.
when we make payments through the Treasury or through the Ministry of Finance, whichever, does that money go through the central bank, or is there another system that just takes money wherever it's supposed to go?
It's supposed to go through central bank.
Okay.
The law is clear. We have one account called the exchequer account.
Yeah, okay.
That is what everything is voted on, both development and recurrent.
Yeah.
So it goes through central bank.
So
those payments of 5.6
There's a record of them in the central bank as them having been paid,
They should be.
but they're not there.
Well, why are we still owing in March last year 8.4? And yet, Parliament has passed
5 point-
repayments of 5.6 over the term. Not only passed, with interest.
That's what I'm hearing.
So we have been paying our debt. No, nobody has said we have not paid our debt because we have not defaulted. So we've been paying it. But why is it not being reflected on the accounts
So is
of
it
central
possible that the debt was actually 14 trillion?
No, this is the point I'm trying to make. That this is the $1 million question.
It's a $1 trillion question, really. Yeah, because
We have been paying. In fact, if you look at 5.6, we didn't even need to take Uhuru's 6 trillion debt. We could have financed our own development.
if we were able to pay 5.6 trillion.
Yes,
Yeah,
we were able to. We didn't need to take debt.
So you're saying that when Parliament passes this particular process that enables us to pay, does it therefore mean that once they pass it, it means we have paid?
Yes, once they pass it, it is passing recurrent expenditure for the exchequer to pay. And it means that they have collected the revenue in taxation to pay.
Okay, you've answered the question
Yes.
I was going to ask.
Recurrent is taxation. Only.
So it exists.
It exists.
So when you're paying, you're paying from something which exists.
Yes. And there's never any year that Kenya Revenue has not said they've not collected the taxation as estimated.
So what does this mean, Jimmy? Because, okay, if we go through this now, chronologically, what you've said. So debt was at this amount over a number of years. There's been, successive payments of this debt because, like you said, nobody has said there's been a default. So debt must have been paid. Where we are now, according to what you're saying, is that money has gone out. It does not reflect on government books. Government books now being coming from Treasury, Central Bank, where
Yes.
money is supposed to be.
Correct.
Now, what would be the reason why you pay a debt and it doesn't show up as a debit on the account? Why would that be?
This is, as CT you're saying, the $1 trillion question. We have a problem in this country that is beyond your imagination or mine. That's really what I'm saying. But I want to be very basic. Because this is something we cannot and nobody can explain to us. When I came out with this report, there was no reaction from government. And I made sure I did it before the regime of Uhuru left power. It was on purpose. It was strategic. It was not about the election. It was strategic. I gave them a chance to answer. They never answered. Up to now, even the current regime has not answered this. I want to tell you something. We as Kenyans are not liable for this debt. And we should not be made liable for this debt. It is an odious debt. And I want to tell you, it is coming to strangle us, and we must decide today, urgently, what we are going to do as Kenyans about this.
What are
It is a total and absolute mess.
What are the options?
I'll give you an example of Mozambique. In Mozambique, I'm sure you've heard of the famous tuna bond
Yep.
scandal.
Yep.
Now, the tuna bond was about a $2 billion loan from 3 entities, so-called to help their tuna fishing.
It's forward thinking and forward looking.
Forward-looking and so on and so forth.
Help the people.
Now, what eventually happened is that what was passed by Parliament, and Parliament knew, was about half that amount. Eventually, the other amount of 1 billion also got to be found out that didn't go towards fish, it went to military and went to other things. In 2019, Mozambicans went to the Constitutional Court and they got an order from the Constitutional Court that declared that debt an odious debt. From that being declared an odious debt, it led to the incarceration of very many people that were involved in getting that debt, including the former Minister of Finance, who had fled to South Africa. Other parties that had gone to America The people who were part of organizing this from
Financial
various institutions led to their arrest. Okay? And up until today, Mozambicans have never paid that debt. There was a cost, though. There was a cost. Their currency depreciated. Their credit rating went down. But you know what they said? It was going down anyway. They were headed for default anyway. What they have starved their country of is the fact that it has personally not hit them, like the seizures of your bank accounts, out of debt default. That situation still exists today. That order, that money has never been paid since 2019. No repayments.
If you look at that example,
And IMF still has a program, right? In fact, they led the onslaught on the theft with Mozambique. They never cut off relations. So we have got to decide what is the better evil. You can accept that your bank account is seized by the government because you're the sovereign. Fine. If you are prepared
if you're okay
to
with
pay
it.
that cost, if you're okay with it, sawa. If you're prepared to make to your M-Pesa is no longer working the way you know it, sawa. You know, M-Pesa is transactions are 43% of GDP go through M-Pesa. If you didn't know, it's very high. So that is going to be a target. That will be a target. So
Unless
if
what
you
happens-
are prepared to go through this, well and good.
we go to a constitutional court like Mozambicans did and object to this.
That is a big option because ours is odious.
But then for this to happen, just like in Mozambique, there was a conspiracy. A conspiracy, like you're saying, it involved several officials. The treasury, their finance ministry was involved. And of course, some of the people in the lending organizations were involved. In this particular case of ours, if you just look at what you've said, then there'd be a very wide web of co-conspirators.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
Those are
Where's
very
our
many.
5.6? For example, where's our 5.6?
Those are
that we
very
paid?
many people, Jimmy, to keep a secret. And you don't even hear about it. There'll be officials in the National Treasury, in the National Debt Management Office, in the Central Bank of Kenya, in the Auditor General's office, in the Controller of Budgets office, in Parliament itself. There are many people, Bwana Jimmy.
Have you ever heard Parliament, ever, when they are making the repayments on their debt of 5.6 in recurrent, ever question how they only approved 2 trillion, but we are paying 5.6? It's the same Parliament that is approving repayments of 5.6. And they're the same one that passed only loans of 2 trillion. Don't you think we have a problem here?
Okay. Who will bail the cat? Is Jimmy Wanjigi prepared to take
That's
this
what
matter
I've been
up to
doing.
court?
That's what I've been doing. That's what I've been doing.
Are you going to court? Are you looking for other like-minded people to join
I think
you?
the greatest court
Yeah.
is the People's Court.
For them to understand.
Yes.
And for them, but then
That is the greatest court.
but then the judiciary did like what it did in Mozambique. It gives it the power of the law.
I can assure you, when the People's Court has understood it, the people will take up those decisions of going to the judiciary, as you're saying, or to any other place. They could even go on the streets.
Are you doing a second follow-up now to this?
Oh,
Because
yes.
this, you looked at the paper. Have you done a paper trail or a money trail to, so that where if you went and the Kenyans asked you, so we are not paying up to this level, who should we hold accountable for that? Will you be able to give us names and tell us?
No.
These are the ones.
You see, this thing is so simple. Yeah? Our laws and our constitution are very clear about freedom of information. I have got part 2 to this. But the minute we accept that this is the reality, the government has got to bring all its books here.
And
Where did the 5.6 go? That we have repaid. That is our money. Please tell me what this 4 trillion above, what did it go to borrow for? See, to be brought right into our table.
you know, Jimmy, what you're saying, simple as it sounds, and it does sound simple, has a complexity woven into it. And the complexity, as Eric was intimating, is it involves more than just the government, the Ministry of Finance, Exchequer, Central Bank, because the same thinking and the same problems you're talking about can be transferred to our devolved units immediately. Because similar thinking that leads to it is mirrored with great clarity. Anyway, Eric.
We wait for part 2, Jimmy. Right? With bated breath. And as you go around the country then creating awareness about this, we also want to see what are you proposing as a next step for Kenyans to do? What is it that what tools are available for Kenyans to make sure that they safeguard themselves from a Ghana situation? But thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. JIMI Wanjigi, politician, businessman, has been our guest this morning. He authored a book called The Kenya Public Debt Heists, and it's all available. You can see it. He says, there's all this debt that we are told that we owe. We actually don't owe this debt. Keep it here for more conversations.